Question 1. A degree of operating leverage ratio of 3.34 suggests that a 10% increase in sales will result in a 33.4 increase in net income, a 33.4 increase in operating income, or a 33.4 decrease in operating income. We can go ahead and rule out C right away. If our sales are increasing, then our operating income is going to increase if we have any degree of operating leverage. So we can cross off any decrease. So we'll be looking for a decrease in net income or a decrease in operating income of this amount. So that's really going to be dictated by the formula. So we pull in that formula and we can see we're using operating income. So it's going to be degree of operating income equals change in operating income over change in units sold. So our change in units sold is going to be that 10% increase in sales. And so when we basically do that math out, we see that we get the 3.34 DOL equals X over 0.1. Do the algebra out and we get 33.4 increase in operating income dictated by the formula. So we will go with B. Question 2. Takeover defenses are provisions that are used to make a firm less attractive. Which party is most likely deterred by such a move? So we've got A, regulators. We're going to cross that one off. Regulators are not going to be a target of a move like this. When we're using a takeover defense, we're trying to deter potential acquirers or firms that would acquire us as the target. And regulators are not out there targeting firms, trying to acquire firms. So we can cross off regulators. B, shareholders. They're also not designed to deter shareholders. The firms want more shareholders and people to buy their stock and be shareholders in the firm. So they're designed more so to protect shareholders, and they're designed to protect shareholders from the hostile bidders. So hostile bidder is somebody that's coming in and trying to buy up the stock without the approval of the board and management. And so generally the takeover defense provisions are trying to kind of penalize these hostile bidders or make it more difficult for them to do so. Sorry, I circled the wrong answer there. So B is not going to be our answer. C, hostile bidders, is going to be our answer. Question 3. The expected PE ratio of a stock is 10 and the actual PE ratio is 10.8. So this is what we think it should be, and this is what it actually is. What can we say about the stock? The stock is overvalued, the stock is undervalued, or the stock is correctly valued. We can immediately cross off correctly valued since these values are not equal. For it to be correctly valued, the PE would need to be equal. So now we need to determine whether it's overvalued or undervalued. So reading this a different way, if we expect the PE ratio to be 10, then that means we would basically pay $10 for every $1 of earnings. But the actual PE ratio is 10.8. So the market is saying that they'd be willing to pay 10.8 for every $1 of earnings. So they're willing to pay a higher price. And so we would say, since we're only willing to pay a lower price, we would say the stock is overvalued and we probably just wouldn't buy the stock, or we might sell it if we owned it. So we'll go with A, the stock is overvalued. Question 4. Burmu Corporation has the following. Debt to equity ratio of 0.5. Burmu is a constant growth firm that just paid a dividend of 3.25. Stock sells for 48.25 per share. And analysts predict a growth rate of 5%. Bonds are currently yielding 7%, and marginal tax rate is 30%. Burmu's after-tax cost of capital is closest to. So we're going to be doing a weighted average cost of capital calculation here. So we're going to need 4 inputs. Some of them we are given. Some of them we're going to have to compute. So we're going to need the weight of debt that we're going to be using for our cost of capital. And then we're going to be using the cost of debt, which that will be a little simpler since we're given the bond yield and tax rate. And then we'll need to figure out the weight of equity and then also our cost of equity. So first, let's find those weights that we're going to need to find, So our debt to equity is 0.5 over 1. So that means that we have 0.5 in debt for every 50 cents of debt for every dollar of equity. So our debt plus equity is 1.5. So that's going to be our total assets. So the percentage of debt that we have will be that 0.5 divided by the debt plus equity. So the amount of debt over the equity, or the debt plus equity. So we get 0.3333 for our weight on debt, and then we can either do 1 over 1.5 or just do 1 minus the 0.3333. So we see our equity. So we've got 2/3 equity, 1/3 debt, essentially. So from here, let's just do our cost of debt calculation quick. So pulling that in, so our cost of debt is going to be what those bonds are currently yielding at 7%. And then we're going to multiply that by 1 minus our tax rate, which is going to be that 30%. So our cost of debt will be about 4.9%. So in our final formula, we're going to be multiplying this 4.9% by the 0.33 debt percentage. So then for our cost of equity, we need to look at what we're given here. So we're given the dividend they just paid, and we're given what the stock price currently sells at, and we're also given the growth rate. So it looks like we're going to be using the dividend discount model to figure out the cost of equity. So let's pull in that formula here. So our cost of equity using the dividend discount model. So that discount model is going to be our price, which equals the dividend just paid, which we're given, times 1 plus that growth rate we're given of 5%. And then what we're going to be, the growth rate's also going to be in the denominator. So what we're going to be solving for here then is R. So we're going to need to rearrange this formula for R, and then we'll be able to just plug in the rest of our values. So when we rearrange for R, we get the discount rate as it equals that dividend times 1 over G, and then we divide that by the price, which we flip to the denominator over here, and then we add G. And so you're really just doing algebra to get from here to here. And then we've got all those numbers, so we just plug those in. So we've got our 3.25 times 1.05 over 48.25, which is the stock price. And then at the end there we add 0.05 to get a cost of equity of 12.1207 or 12.07%. So bringing all that together, then we'll bring in our weighted average cost of capital. So we get 0.3333 for the debt times that 0.049, which we got for cost of debt. And then we're doing the 2/3 equity times that 12.07 number we got. And we get 0.0968 or 9.68%. Answer B. Question 5. Regarding target customers of a firm as outlined in the business model, which of the following is least likely considered? So 2 of these answers are going to be things that we would consider for the target customers of the business model, and 1 is not. So we've got A, type of price discrimination. This is probably not considered since this is going to be this isn't really related to who our target customer is going to be. It's more so going to be involved in the pricing model and how we want to price our goods or services for those target customers. So this could potentially be our answer. Let's take a look at B and C though. B, target demographic segments. This is certainly going to be important for identifying who we'll be marketing our products to and who our target customer will be. So we can cross off B. C, the target customer segments that will be served. Similar to B, this is also going to be important to understand for knowing our target customers, so we can confidently go back and pick A, type of price discrimination. Question 6. Which of the following is most likely an example of a variable cost? So variable costs are going to be more directly related to amount of sales that we have. So as our sales are increasing, the variable costs will also be increasing. So whatever answer we choose should kind of fall under that camp, where if we sell more, we're going to need to have more of this cost item. So A, insurance costs. Insurance costs is usually going to be set for some fixed period of time. Maybe it's semi-annual or annual rate where you're going to be paying the set amount. So if you are fixing that cost, that's not going to be a variable cost because it won't change based on the amount you're selling for that period. So we can go ahead and cross that off. B, depreciation and amortization. These are also largely going to be fixed. They're related to assets that we've already purchased and that we're kind of expensing over time as we use them. But they're not necessarily going to be really related to the level of sales that we have. So if we have more sales, it's not going to mean more depreciation in that exact period. It might mean that we need to buy more equipment down the line and then have larger depreciation, but it's not going to change variably right in the moment. C, materials and direct labor costs for a manufacturer. Higher output is going to lead to higher materials and labor costs needed to manufacture the products. So we can conclude that that will be variable with the amount of sales that we have and go with C. Question 7. Kimtech Incorporated, a fictitious technology company, has 20 million shares outstanding in total debt of 100 million. Additionally, the company has 10 million in cash. If the share price is 150 USD per share, the enterprise value of Kimtech is closest to. So our enterprise value, we're going to be adding our equity plus the debt and then subtracting out the cash. So we've got market value of shares plus market value of debt minus cash. So we are given the total debt and the total cash, but then we'll need to calculate market value of shares using the shares outstanding times the share price. So we'll pull that in here. We see we get that 150 per share times the 20 million shares gives us our market value of equity. And then we're going to add the 100 million of debt and subtract out that 10 million of cash. Gives us 3,090 million or 3.09 billion. So we'll go with answer B. Question 8. The contribution margin per unit for product A is $20 and the firm's fixed cost of production up to 500,000 units is 400,000. The degree of operating leverage at 300,000 units is closest to. So let's pull in our degree of operating leverage formula here. So I think we're given all the numbers. So we've got contribution margin, which is going to be our $20 per unit multiplied by the number of units we're selling, which is going to be 300,000. Don't mistakenly use that 500,000, which is the fixed cost up to. So as long as we're under that number, then our fixed cost is going to be 400,000 for fixed cost. And so we're putting that contribution margin number in down here too, subtracting out the fixed cost. And when we do that, let's pull it in here. So we've got that 20 times 300,000 in the numerator, in the denominator as well, and then we just subtract out the fixed cost in the denominator. Gives us 1.071, round it to B, 1.07. Question 9. Using Company A's income statement, its degree of operating leverage is closest to. So before we look at all these numbers in the table, let's pull in our degree of operating leverage formula. So we've got degree of operating leverage equals change in operating income over change in sales. So we are given 2 years worth of information. So we've got 2013, let's just say here, or I guess 2023, either's fine. And then 2022. So this will be our year 1, and this will be our year 2 numbers that we'll look at. And so we need to figure out what the change in operating income is over the change in sales. So we've got our change in sales data given, and then it looks like we're given net income, but not operating income. So we're going to need to subtract out the line items on the income statement to get the operating income numbers for each year. And so for operating income, that's going to be equal to our EBIT. So EBIT is earnings before interest and taxes. So EBIT is basically going to be everything below, so we're not going to include everything below interest expense since it's before interest and taxes. So interest and taxes are down here. So nothing will be included in that. And we're also not including other income since this isn't operating income. So we can ignore everything below interest expense, and we're basically just going to be subtracting cost of goods sold, SG&A expense, and R&D expense from the 430 and the 375 to get our two operating income numbers. So when we do that, we'll let's pull this in down here, and I'll just scroll down one so we have a little more room. So this is our final formula we need. So we've got 2013 operating income is that 430 minus 132 minus 33 minus 24 gives us 241. And then doing the same thing with the 2012 numbers gives us 205. So our change in operating income is positive 17.56% or 0.1756. Then our change in sales number, which we're also going to need, is just going to be these top line numbers here. So we grew 14.67%. So now we've got our two numbers here, and we can just plug those into this degree of operating leverage formula. So plugging that in, we get the 0.1756 over 0.1467 gives us 1.197. Probably just some differences in rounding here, so we can go with A. Question 10. Project Red and Project Blue are two mutually exclusive projects whose projected cash flows are given in the following table. Using a required rate of return of 8% on both projects, the project that will most likely increase value is or are. So we need to figure out basically we can do our cash flows function on the calculator for both of these and then figure out which one has the highest NV, net present value. So just looking at these though, we can also figure it out if we were a little more pressed for time on the exam. But we'll still go through on the calculator to show it. But they both have the same outflow of 800,000, and then red has 600,000 coming in year 1, 300,000 year 2, and 60,000 in year 3. Blue is similar, but the 60 and the 600 are flipped. So we have more cash flow coming in at the beginning for Project Red. So this 600,000 value is only going to be discounted by that 8% for 1 year. So it's not going to be discounted for as many years as it is in Project Blue, whereas this is going to be discounted at 8% for 3 years. So this 600,000 is the big cash flow number, and it's going to end up being a lot lower because it's discounted at 3 years. So from that, we can deduce that Project Red is going to add more value than Project Blue, but I think it's still good to go through the exercise on the calculator just to check our work. So let's go into the cash flows function. I've already got Project Red loaded in here, so we've got the minus 800. And if you want to save some time too, you can drop all the zeros off here when you're punching it into your calculator. It'll give you the same answer as if you put 800, 600, 300, and 60, it'll give you the same as if you put all the 100,000 in. So we've got minus 800, positive 600 in period 1, positive 300 in period 2, and positive 60 in period 3. We discount that at 8%, scroll down and compute. We get 60.3871. So write that number down somewhere and let's switch it up and see what we get. So for Project Blue then, we've got the same 800,000 going out, but our period 2 cash flow is just going to be 60. So punch that in, hit enter. Period 2 cash flow is the same at 300, and then period 3 now is going to be 600. So we enter that. No stray cash flows, so we've still got the same discount rate at 8. Scroll down and compute. We can see it gives us a negative value actually. So negative 10.9435%. Red we had written down at 60.3871, so we can conclude that A, Project Red, is going to be the project that increases value.